The wind cut through the skeletal oaks like a knife, carrying the metallic scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Dr. Robert Chandler's boots crunched against the frost-hardened underbrush as he approached the yawning mouth of Whispering Hollow Cave. The limestone entrance gaped like the jaw of some ancient beast, shadows pooling in the recesses beyond, where the weak autumn light dared not linger. Even from a distance, the cave seemed alive, breathing slowly in the cold Appalachian morning. Robert adjusted his satchel and tightened his scarf against the bite of October air. At 38, he was no stranger to the silent hunger of caves, the way darkness seemed to press against the skin, invade the ears, and make the heart thump in rhythm with unseen drips of water echoing from unseen chambers. But Whispering Hollow felt different. Maps marked the terrain as unremarkable, yet his surveys hinted at a strange geometry, formations that should not exist, layers of mineral deposits that defied chronological logic. Something was hidden here. "You sure about this, Dr. Chandler?" James Whittaker's gravelly voice broke the tense quiet. The local guide's eyes scanned the forest nervously, lingering on the gnarled roots that curled over the rocky slope like fingers. He spat tobacco onto the frosted soil. "Science don't explain everything, Doc. My granddaddy told me things. Things that happened down in that hollow. No man's meant to see." Robert nodded, pulling a notebook from his satchel. "The anomalies are documented and verified. This is research, not folklore. We follow protocol, we observe, we record. That is all." James grunted, his hands white-knuckled on the coil of rope slung over his shoulder. "Protocol won't stop what's in there." A sudden gust rattled the trees, carrying a damp, sulphurous scent that made Robert wrinkle his nose. He bent to examine the ground at the caves. Threshold, mud, streaked with reddish clay, as if the earth itself had bled here. His fingers brushed against the cool, gritty surface, and a shiver travelled up his spine. From within the cavern, a faint whispering seemed to rise with the wind, but when he looked, nothing moved except the shadows dancing along the jagged walls. James flicked a lantern into the darkness, its amber glow revealing jagged stalactites like skeletal teeth overhead. "You see that?" he muttered, pointing to a narrow passage veiled in blackness. "I've led many into caves, but never this one. Folks say it swallows men whole, never gives 'em back." Robert swallowed, tasting the bitter tang of fear he hadn't felt in years. The smell of damp stone mixed with the faint metallic odor in the air, like iron hidden beneath centuries of sediment. Somewhere deeper, water trickled. Yet the rhythm seemed deliberate, as if it marked time rather than nature. With a final adjustment of his satchel, he stepped toward the cavern's mouth. The forest's autumn wind roared behind him, as though trying to push him back, to warn him away. James grunted behind him but said nothing more, letting Robert go first. As he passed beneath the arch of stone, a sudden chill froze him mid-step. The air inside smelled of wet stone and something far older, something pungent, almost decayed, like ancient secrets waiting to breathe again. And then, faintly, unmistakably, he heard it. The sound of dragging footsteps that weren't his own. Robert froze, every nerve screaming. The darkness seemed to lean closer, listening, and in that instant he realized he was not alone in Whispering Hollow. Before we go deeper, understand this. This story isn't for everyone. If you're still here, you're one of the few who can face what America buried. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? And would you dare hear this story from your own backyard? Chapter 2. Echoes of the Forgotten. The dragging sound came again, soft, deliberate, echoing off the damp walls of Whispering Hollow. Robert's lantern trembled in his hand, its flickering glow casting long, twitching shadows that seemed to slither along the uneven stone. Each step forward made the air colder, heavier, as if the cave itself had taken a deep breath and was waiting to exhale. The metallic tang of iron grew stronger, clinging to the back of his throat. James trailed closely behind, the rope dragging against wet stone. "I warned you, Doc," he muttered, his voice low, almost a growl. "Some things in these hills ain't meant to be studied." Robert swallowed, feeling the bitter taste of adrenaline mixing with the earthy tang of mud and limestone dust. "If there's an explanation, we'll find it," he said, though the words felt hollow even as they left his mouth. The passage narrowed. Stalactites hung like daggered teeth, dripping water that hissed when it hit the lantern's metal casing. The floor was slick, the mud sucking at their boots with every cautious step. Robert's fingers brushed against the rough wall, feeling faint grooves, as though something, or someone, had carved into the stone long ago. But the markings were irregular, chaotic, and old. Far too old to be a human hand. "See that?" James whispered, pointing to a darkened alcove. A faint shimmer of white caught Robert's eye, like bone or chalk. He crouched, brushing away dirt, and uncovered the tip of a skeletal finger, gnarled and twisted with time. The smell of decay hit him then, a faint, sour scent that made him gag, and yet beneath it something else lingered, coppery, sharp, alive. Robert's pulse quickened. These bones, they're not recent. Decades, maybe centuries old. He traced the lines carefully, noting the jagged breaks, the erosion from centuries of water dripping nearby. Something in his quivered, not fear exactly, but recognition. The cave was holding its secrets tightly. A sudden hiss made both men jump. From deeper inside, water dripped faster now, but in uneven bursts, like breathing. Then the dragging returned, louder, closer. James's face went pale in the lantern light. "Doc, that ain't natural. Something's moving down there. Something big." Robert forced himself to stay calm. He jotted notes in his leather-bound journal, the scratch of pencil against paper sounding deafening in the suffocating silence. His ears caught the faint scent of sulfur, a hot, dry tingle at the back of his throat. The walls seemed to hum, vibrating subtly underfoot. Something in the darkness shifted. Then, without warning, a low, guttural voice echoed through the chamber. Not words, just a sound, deep and hollow, like the cave itself had grown a throat. "Who's there?" Robert whispered, though his voice barely carried over the unnatural resonance. A cold breeze brushed the back of his neck. Something wet, almost slick, brushed his arm. He spun, lantern swinging, revealing nothing. Only shadows dancing along the stone, mocking him. James whispered hoarsely, "I ain't never heard the cave do that." His eyes darted wildly. "Doc, maybe we shouldn't be here." Robert steadied his breathing, tasting iron on his tongue as panic tried to claw its way up. The cave seemed to exhale around them, carrying whispers of forgotten horrors, secrets buried under centuries of limestone. And then, in the faintest corner of his vision, a shape moved, a silhouette far too large to be human, vanishing before he could focus. For the first time, Robert wondered if some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. Chapter 3. Whispers Beneath the Stone. The cave seemed to pulse with every heartbeat as Robert and James moved deeper. The narrow passage widened into a vaulted chamber, the walls slick with centuries of condensation. The air was thick, musty, carrying the sharp metallic tang of iron and something older, something like the scent of old parchment left to rot underground. Robert's fingers brushed against jagged rock, feeling the fine grit of limestone dust that crumbled at his touch. "Doc." James's voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried a weight that made Robert's stomach tighten. The guide was staring at the floor, where strange symbols had been etched into the stone. They were crude, but deliberate. Lines intersecting in impossible angles, some forming loops like twisted eyes staring upward. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, striking the carvings and making them shimmer with a wet gleam, almost as if they were alive. Robert crouched, tracing the lines with a gloved finger. The carvings were not recent, they were worn smooth in places, but the pattern was familiar. These are markings from the old Appalachian sects," he murmured. "Groups that lived in isolation in the 1800s, ritualistic, superstitious. Some believed in practices far darker than any folklore suggests." James's jaw tightened. "I told you, Doc. Things down here ain't just old stories." He kicked at a small pile of dirt and stones. Underneath, Robert saw it, a faded scrap of leather, brittle, stained, dark with age. He picked it up carefully. The faint smell of smoke and iron rose from it, and as he unfolded the fragile piece, he realized it was a page from a journal. The handwriting was almost illegible, curling letters pressed deep into the paper. A single sentence leapt out. "The hollow holds the truth, and those who enter will hear it breathing." Robert shivered. He could almost hear it, too. A faint whispering that had started at the cave's entrance, now growing stronger, as if the walls themselves were speaking. A sudden clatter echoed from a side passage. Robert spun, lantern swinging wildly, revealing nothing. Only a wet streak along the rock, glistening like fresh blood, leading into a dark tunnel that hadn't been there before, or at least one he hadn't noticed. The smell of iron intensified, sharp and biting. James swallowed hard, his teeth chattering despite the layers of clothing. "I reckon that's enough exploring for one day." His words trembled. "Some things you don't poke at." But Robert's curiosity was a fire he could not extinguish. He bent closer to the journal page, tasting the faint mustiness on his tongue, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. The words hinted at secrets lost to time, rituals, disappearances, whispers of an entity that had been bound beneath the stone for generations. And then, a soft voice echoed from the tunnel ahead. Human, yet distorted, like it had traveled through centuries of rock. A whisper, barely audible. "You shouldn't have come." Robert froze. The hairs on his neck stood on end. The cave's darkness seemed to swell, closing in, swallowing the weak lantern light. Something moved just beyond the glow. A shadow, darker than the surrounding black, impossible to define, and yet undeniably alive. For the first time, he realized that whatever lay deeper in Whispering Hollow was not just a secret of history. It was waiting. Chapter 4. The Hollow's Heart. The faint whispering grew louder as Robert stepped cautiously toward the side tunnel. The air thickened, tasting of damp stone and something iron-rich, metallic, almost like blood pooled under layers of sediment. Each footstep echoed eerily, bouncing from jagged walls, making it impossible to tell how far the sound came from or how many unseen presences lurked nearby. James trailed reluctantly behind, his rope slipping over slick rock. "Doc, I swear I don't like this," he muttered, spitting into the shadows. "I've guided men through caves my whole life, but this hollow, it ain't natural. Something in here watches." Robert kept his eyes on the flickering lantern, scanning the tunnel walls for clues. And then he saw it, a faint outline etched into the limestone, nearly invisible beneath centuries of calcite deposits. He crouched, brushing away the dust with trembling fingers. Symbols. Not the ritualistic lines they'd seen earlier, but something older, far older. And at their center, the unmistakable shape of a human hand, pressed flat against the stone, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. A sudden clink echoed behind him. Robert spun. Shadows shifted unnaturally, though the passage appeared empty. The air smelled sharper now, almost acrid, making his eyes water. He could hear a faint scratching beneath the distant drip of water, a rhythm that made his stomach twist. "Look here," he whispered, voice trembling. The handprint was surrounded by scratches, tiny etchings that formed letters over decades, layers upon layers of desperate writing. Some were readable. "They come. The hollow feeds. Keep them buried. The truth will wake them." James swallowed audibly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Doc, maybe we should turn back. That ain't normal writing." Robert's fingers traced the grooves. His gloves picked up the faint warmth of the stone, like it had absorbed life from something recently alive. "These writings, they're warnings," he said. "And whoever left them, they didn't survive." A cold draught swept past, carrying the unmistakable scent of iron and decay. His throat tightened. Something deeper in the cave exhaled, slow and deliberate, almost sentient. From the shadows ahead, a low rumble rolled through the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling, and water dripping from stalactites hissed as though in pain. Robert's pulse raced. In the faint lantern light, he thought he saw shapes moving at the periphery, figures crouched low, elongated, unmoving. But every time he turned fully, there was nothing. Then came the unmistakable sound of breathing, not his own, not James's. Deep, wet, irregular, from the tunnel ahead. And just as he strained to peer further, a small pile of dirt shifted on its own, revealing a rusted iron box. Its edges were corroded, but the lock was intact. The air around it was thick, almost viscous, smelling strongly of iron and age, like centuries of secrets had been trapped within. Robert's hand hovered over the box. A shiver ran through him, a warning from every sense, the smell, the touch of the stone, the echoing sounds of the cave. But curiosity clawed at him relentlessly. James backed away, muttering prayers under his breath. With a trembling breath, Robert lifted the lid. Inside lay objects that seemed impossible, rusted tools, bones polished smooth, and a bundle of brittle parchments written in the same cryptic, desperate hand as the wall carvings. And on top, a small, carved figurine, its eyes hollow, its mouth twisted in a scream frozen for eternity. A gust of icy wind blasted from the tunnel behind them, extinguishing the lantern. Darkness swallowed them whole. In that instant, Robert felt it. The cave wasn't just hiding secrets. It was alive, aware, and something within had been waiting for him. Chapter 5. The Sect's Shadow. The darkness pressed in around Robert like a living thing. The lantern's flame sputtered, casting jagged shadows along the walls, and the acrid scent of iron and decayed parchment clung to his clothes and hair. James fumbled behind him, whispering prayers that seemed swallowed by the cavern's oppressive silence. Robert's fingers brushed the carved figurine again. Its hollow eyes seemed to bore into him, a silent accusation from a time long past. The carvings matched those scratched into the limestone walls, the same ritualistic symbols, but older, more deliberate. Whoever made them had wanted something, or someone, to remember. He unfolded the brittle parchments. The words were cramped, curling, and in places almost illegible. But some passages were clear. They spoke of a secretive Appalachian sect, known only in scattered, fragmented records. "We guard the hollow," one line read. "The heart beneath the stone must never awaken." Another warned, "The ones who enter hear whispers not meant for living ears. They will not leave unchanged." James's voice trembled behind him. "Doc, this is the stuff of nightmares. Folks never talk about this sect. Old-timers say they vanished one winter night, all of them, like the hollow swallowed 'em whole." His eyes darted nervously toward the tunnel where the iron box had been found. "And some say their spirits still linger." A faint, wet sound echoed from deeper within the cave. Robert froze, tasting the copper tang of blood on his tongue even though he wasn't injured. The sound was subtle, dragging, scraping, but unmistakable. Something, or someone, was moving in the shadows ahead. The parchments mentioned strange rituals performed in the deepest chambers, offerings of tools, bones, and carved figures to an unseen force they called the Heart. The Heart, according to the sect, was not a being, but a presence, a living memory of those who had perished, buried beneath layers of stone and secrecy. It fed on attention, on the curiosity of outsiders, and it remembered. A sudden clatter made both men jump. Rocks slid from the ceiling into the mud with wet thuds. The lantern swayed violently, revealing for an instant a figure crouched at the far end of the tunnel. Tall, thin, impossibly still, its outline blurred in the flickering light, and then vanished. James whispered, voice barely audible. "Doc, we shouldn't be here. The Hollow don't like visitors. It remembers." Robert forced himself to focus. The sect's writings hinted at exactly this, that the cave would test intruders, that it could manipulate sight and sound, disorient the mind, and lure men deeper into its heart. Every sense was being assaulted: the musky damp of stone, the metallic tang of decay, the echoing whispers that seemed to come from every direction, the touch of cold air on his skin that moved like fingers, and a faint taste of iron in the air itself. Then, from the corner of his eye, the carved figurine twitched. He jerked it up, nearly dropping the parchments. Its hollow eyes gleamed in the dim light. Robert's pulse thundered in his ears as the whispering grew louder, more coherent, almost forming words. "The heart sees you. You cannot leave." A cold wind roared down the tunnel, extinguishing the lantern once again. Darkness engulfed them completely. Robert felt the floor tremble underfoot, subtle at first, then with growing intensity. The cave was alive in a way that defied logic. It was aware, waiting, and judging. And deep within the stone, somewhere beyond the reach of lantern light and reason, something stirred. Disclaimer: this story is purely fictional. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is entirely coincidental. Chapter 6. Into the Hollow. Robert's boots sank into the wet mud as he followed the narrow tunnel, the parchments clutched tightly in his gloved hands. Every step echoed unnaturally, bouncing off walls that seemed to close in, swallowing sound and light alike. The air was thick with the coppery taste of iron and the acrid stench of damp stone. Each breath felt heavier than the last, as though the cave itself weighed on his lungs. James muttered prayers under his breath, the words trembling and broken. "I don't like this, Doc. I don't like it at all." The rope coiled over his shoulder dragged behind, splashing into puddles that smelled faintly of decay. He flinched at every whisper of movement, at every drop of water that fell with a sibilant hiss from the jagged ceiling. The tunnel widened into a circular chamber. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth above, and the walls shimmered with moisture, reflecting the weak lantern glow in fractured patterns. At the center of the chamber, Robert noticed something impossible: a depression in the stone floor, perfectly circular, lined with smooth limestone, as if carved with deliberate care. Inside, a shallow layer of earth had been disturbed: bones, rusted tools, and fragments of the carved figurines he had found earlier. He bent closer, inhaling the sharp, iron-heavy scent. The bones were human. Some were almost skeletal, others more complete, their surfaces polished smooth as if handled repeatedly. A sudden shiver ran down his spine. He could almost feel the hands that had once touched them, the presence that lingered. His tongue tingled with the metallic taste of blood. Or was it fear? James whispered hoarsely behind him, voice breaking. "Doc, I told you. This hollow. It don't like eyes that pry. It remembers." He gestured at the tunnel from which they had come. "We should leave. Now." Robert shook his head, forcing himself to focus. The parchments had warned of this chamber. It was the heart of the sect's rituals. Offerings had been made here: bones, tools, figurines, all intended to appease a presence buried deep within the cave. A presence that was not entirely dead. A sudden scraping echoed from the tunnel entrance. Robert spun, lantern swinging, and saw a shadow flit across the wall. Tall, elongated, impossible to define. The dragging sound returned, slow and deliberate, like something with heavy limbs moving across stone. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity anchored him in place. He bent to examine the carvings etched into the chamber walls, symbols layered over older symbols, telling a story of fear, desperation, and devotion. And beneath it all, a single phrase repeated in jagged letters, almost invisible in the wet stone: "The heart awakens for those who linger." A gust of wind, cold and wet, swept through the chamber, snuffing out the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. Robert felt it then, a presence circling, patient, waiting. His skin prickled, hair standing on end. The whispering returned, louder now, forming words he could almost understand. "You see us. You cannot leave." James's voice cracked in terror. "Doc, it's coming. It knows we're here." A cold, wet hand brushed against Robert's arm. Not James's, not his own. Something unseen, something alive. And then, from the blackness, a voice hissed directly into his ear. "Welcome to the Hollow. You belong now." Chapter 7. The Heart's Gaze. Darkness pressed in on all sides, suffocating and thick, carrying the iron-heavy tang of decay that coated Robert's tongue and throat. His fingers trembled as he groped along the slick limestone wall, brushing over jagged carvings and shallow depressions worn smooth by centuries of touch. Every step echoed unnaturally, as if the cave itself mocked their intrusion. James whimpered behind him, voice thin and fragile. "Doc, I don't think we should be here. It's watching. I can feel it." Robert swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of blood on his tongue, not his own, and shivered. He gripped the parchments tighter, their brittle pages whispering under his fingers. The carvings on the walls began to blur, shapes twisting before his eyes, shadows stretched unnaturally, writhing like serpents across stone. He blinked, yet the movement continued, rhythmic, deliberate. And then he saw it, an apparition, faint at first, a shimmer of white light, coalescing into a figure crouched over the pile of bones. Its eyes, hollow and black, bore into him, and its thin hands reached out, almost beckoning. The air thickened, smelling of sulfur and iron, and Robert felt the chill seep into his bones. His skin prickled as if hundreds of invisible fingers were crawling over him. James whispered, terrified, "Doc, that's not real. That can't be real." Robert shook his head, but the figure persisted. The parchment's warnings echoed in his mind. The heart awakens for those who linger. It shows the past. It claims the present. The figure's movements mirrored the carvings on the walls, twisting, clawing, impossible postures that suggested agony and ritual. A sound like wet stone scraping against stone reverberated through the chamber. Robert's stomach clenched. Something deep in the cave moved with deliberate force. The air grew hotter, then icy cold, and the same breath, and he could hear whispers forming words, though distorted. "Here. See. Join." He stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. The apparition vanished for a heartbeat, only to reappear closer, hovering over the rusted iron box. Its hollow gaze fixed on Robert. He felt an overwhelming pressure in his chest, like the cave itself was pinning him down. Every sense screamed in panic, the musty damp, the metallic taste, the wet touch of unseen hands brushing against him, the low hum vibrating through the stone beneath his feet. James grabbed his shoulder, shaking him. "Doc, move! We're leaving now!" But Robert couldn't move. His mind was filled with flashes, visions of the sect performing rituals centuries ago, chanting in low, guttural tones, offering bones and figurines to the heart, their eyes hollow, mouths twisted in silent screams. The room seemed to expand and contract around him, the carvings writhing as though alive. Then the voice came again, louder, unmistakable. "You see us. You cannot leave. The heart remembers." A cold, wet gust of air slammed into him. He gasped, tasting iron, and the lantern fell from his hands, extinguishing with a soft hiss. Darkness swallowed him completely. And in that absolute black, he felt it, something pressing against his mind, probing, watching, learning. He realized, with a shiver that ran through every nerve, that the heart did not merely watch. It knew him. Chapter 8. The Cave's Memory. Darkness wrapped around them like a living shroud. The lantern lay shattered on the wet stone floor, its weak glow extinguished, leaving Robert and James in suffocating black. The air was thick and fetid, tasting of iron and rot, clinging to their throats with every desperate breath. Each inhale was a struggle. Each exhale seemed to vanish into the stone itself. James shivered uncontrollably. I can't see anything, Doc. I don't think we're supposed to." His voice cracked, blending with the soft drip of water echoing from somewhere deep within the cave. Robert's fingers brushed the walls, tracing the jagged carvings, the etched symbols, and the shallow depressions that felt unnervingly like fingerprints pressed into stone. And then he realized. They weren't just symbols. They were memories. Each groove, each curve told a story of pain, ritual, and desperation. The cave remembered everything it had witnessed. From somewhere ahead, a whisper rose. At first it was indistinct, like the wind sighing through leaves, but slowly it became coherent. The past. The past. The past. The voice seemed to come from the walls themselves, pressing into their skulls. Robert shivered as he tasted copper in his mouth again, not blood, but the heavy, metallic tang of old fear. James grabbed his arm. "Doc, I think it's showing us something." Robert's eyes strained in the blackness. Shapes flickered across his vision. Shadowed figures crouched over firelight, chanting in low, guttural tones. Faces hollow, mouths twisted in silent screams. Bones laid carefully in circles, offerings to something unseen, yet unmistakably alive. He could hear the chanting, smell the smoke, feel the heat of the fire on his skin, taste ash in his mouth. Then the dragging sound returned, slower this time, deliberate. The floor trembled faintly beneath the air feet. Robert realized the cave itself was moving, or perhaps the presence within it, something ancient, patient, and aware. The heart. A soft glow flickered from the far wall. Robert approached, feeling the wet stone beneath his hands, cold and slick. The light revealed more carvings, lines overlapping lines, forming crude human forms, faces twisted in terror. One figure was kneeling, head pressed against stone, its hollow eyes carved into the wall, staring directly at him. Suddenly James screamed. He pointed at a corner of the chamber, and Robert's heart skipped. In the faint light, he saw the shadow of a figure move against the wall, tall, thin, impossibly fluid. It mimicked their movements, yet moved independently. The temperature dropped drastically, frost forming along the edges of their clothes and hair. Robert realized with a shudder that the heart was not just aware. It was communicating, showing them what had happened, what had been buried, what had been lost, the sect, their rituals, their disappearances. It was all alive here, trapped in stone, waiting for witnesses. And then the whispering grew louder, almost urgent, filling the chamber from every corner. The heart remembers. You cannot leave. You belong. Robert's stomach lurched. He could feel it pressing against his mind, probing, learning, judging. And he understood with a cold certainty that the heart was not done with them, not by a long shot. Chapter 9. The Heart Awakens. The cold wrapped around Robert like steel chains, pressing against his chest with every breath. The cave had grown impossibly silent, the only sound the occasional drip of water hitting stone, sharp and hollow in the suffocating darkness. The metallic tang of iron lingered in the air, coating his tongue and making his stomach churn. James stumbled backward, muttering frantic prayers under his breath. "Doc, I don't think we should have never come here." His voice trembled, swallowed almost immediately by the cavern's oppressive blackness. Robert's eyes darted to the corner of the chamber. The shadows had thickened, moving independently of the flickering remnants of light. And then he saw it. A faint outline at first, shifting like smoke, coalescing into a figure taller than any man should be, with limbs elongated and twisted unnaturally. Its head tilted inhumanly, hollow eyes glinting in the darkness. The heart had taken form. Robert's pulse thundered in his ears. The air around them grew thick, heavy, and wet, pressing against his skin. Every sense screamed alarm. He could feel the creature's presence, an intelligence, patient and knowing, probing at his mind, assessing, learning. Its wet, fetid breath seemed to seep through the darkness, carrying the coppery tang of old blood and decay. James grabbed Robert's arm, shaking him. "Doc, it sees us! We've got to get out!" Robert shook his head, unable to move. The heart's form seemed to ripple, phasing in and out like liquid shadow, its limbs stretching impossibly long, brushing the cave walls without making a sound. The whispering began again, louder now, echoing in their minds rather than their ears. The heart remembers. The heart sees you. You cannot leave. A low, wet scraping sound reverberated from beneath the stone floor. Robert felt the vibration through his boots, through the very marrow of his bones. He glanced down at the rusted iron box, now ominously glowing faintly from within. The carvings and bones in the chamber seemed to shift subtly, as though aligning themselves toward it. The heart moved closer. Robert could see the shadows of its long fingers stretching toward him, blacker than the darkness around them. The air was heavy with damp, earthy smell, tinged with the acrid stench of decay. He could taste iron, sharp and biting, filling his mouth as though the cave itself was bleeding. James cried out, backing into the wall, "Doc, it's going to take us." Then a chilling voice, wet and guttural, echoed from the shadows. "You belong to the hollow. You hear its memory. You are its witness." Robert felt an icy pressure at the base of his skull, like hands pressing in, forcing his vision to blur, and through the darkness he glimpsed movement. Figures from the past, the sect performing rituals, their eyes hollow, their mouths twisted in silent screams. The heart had pulled their memory into the present, entwining past, and now warping reality. A cold, wet tendril of shadow brushed Robert's arm. He gasped, tasting iron again. The heart was no longer just aware. It was active, reaching, marking him, pulling him into its macabre history. And then the whispers became a chorus. "You cannot leave. The heart is hungry. The hollow remembers all." Robert realized with bone-deep horror that they were not just intruders. They were part of the cave's story now, and the heart was ready to claim them.
Did you know, while most deep cave mysteries seem like legend, archaeology shows caves in the Appalachian region really were significant to ancient peoples. For example, studies at Appalachian Caverns, also called Linville Cave, in Tennessee revealed that Native Americans used the cave repeatedly over thousands of years, going back as far as the Middle Woodland period, roughly 1,500 years ago according to carbon dating evidence. Archaeologists found buried cultural material and tools in the cave deposits, showing it wasn't just a geological formation, but also part of human history and habitation deep underground. Additionally, elsewhere in the southern Appalachian Plateau, particularly in caves in northern Alabama, almost 1,000-year-old Native American cave art has been uncovered. These hidden drawings are thought to represent ceremonial or spirit figures, showing that indigenous peoples revered caves as sacred spaces, possibly entrances to spiritual realms. So while caves seem eerie and unexplored, there's real science and real culture tied to these dark places. Ancient footprints, fire pits, tools, and artwork all show that humans were entering and using caves long before modern explorers ever arrived.
Chapter 10. The sect's bloodline. The darkness around Robert felt alive, pressing closer with every heartbeat. His fingers grazed the wet, jagged walls, tracing grooves carved centuries ago, warnings, records, perhaps even prayers from the vanished sect. The metallic tang of iron filled his mouth again, thick and bitter, and he could taste fear itself, sharp and acidic. James trembled beside him, his rope clutched like a lifeline. "Doc, it's showing us something. I can feel it." Robert's lantern lay shattered, but the faint glow of the heart illuminated the chamber in pulses, like a heartbeat. Shadows shifted unnaturally, forming shapes almost human, almost alive. And then he saw it. A mural scratched into the damp stone, nearly imperceptible beneath layers of calcite. It depicted the sect centuries ago, kneeling around a figure that seemed more shadow than flesh, offering bones, tools, and carved figurines. The eyes of the figure gleamed in the dim glow. The parchments had mentioned this. The heart. And now Robert understood. The sect had not merely worshipped it, they had bound themselves to it, offering generations of their own bloodline to ensure the presence endured. Each symbol, each carving, each artifact in the cave was a thread in that unbroken chain. A low, wet scraping echoed from the far side of the chamber. Robert froze, tasting copper on his tongue. The heart was moving again, closer, aware of their comprehension. The air smelled like iron and damp earth, thick with centuries of ritual. Every sense was assaulted. James whispered, voice shaking, "Doc, they all vanished. All the sect. Gone? The hollow. It keeps them." Robert followed the mural, tracing the figures with his trembling finger. One figure stood taller than the rest, its hand raised, pointing toward a narrow passage beyond the chamber, and then he saw the final detail. A fide, Gure carved into stone, face twisted in silent agony, hand pressed flat against the wall, identical to the handprint they had seen in the earlier tunnel. The heart's victims were immortalized here, trapped in stone and memory, part of the cave forever. A cold, wet gust of wind slammed into them, extinguishing what little ambient light remained. The whispers intensified, almost intelligible. The bloodline feeds. The heart remembers. You are now part. Robert's pulse thundered. He felt the shadow stretch toward him, a fluid, living darkness probing, marking, claiming. He stumbled backward, feeling wet fingers brush his arm, fingers that were not human. James cried out, dragging Robert toward the side passage the mural indicated. "We need to follow it. We need to see what it wants." As they stepped closer, the floor beneath them shivered, the walls humming in a low, wet vibration that reverberated through their bones. The heart had chosen to reveal a deeper secret, the truth behind the sect's disappearance, and the ritual that bound generations of Appalachian souls to this cave. Robert's lantern flickered back to life for a brief moment, and in that brief light he saw the first evidence of the living horror beneath the stone, a series of small chambers, each containing remnants of lives long past, bones, rusted tools, and figurines arranged meticulously, offering silent testimony to the sect's macabre devotion. The heart waited, patient and sentient, pulling them further into its memory, deeper into the secret the cave had guarded for centuries. Chapter 11. The Eyes in the Stone. The passage beyond the mural narrowed, forcing Robert and James to move single file. The cave's air had grown thick, almost viscous, carrying the pungent stench of iron and damp decay that coated their tongues and burned their throats. Every step squelched in mud, echoing unnaturally, as though the walls themselves were amplifying their fear. Robert's fingers brushed the jagged walls, feeling faint grooves and depressions that seemed to pulse beneath his touch. The whispering had become more urgent, almost impatient. "You see, you feel, you cannot leave." Suddenly James froze. "Doc, look." Ahead, faint points of pale light glimmered from the stone itself. Robert squinted, heart pounding. Tiny orbs, scattered across the tunnel walls, glimmered faintly like wet pearls, and within each orb he could swear he saw eyes, hollow, human, watching. The whispers coalesced into words. "We see you. We remember. You are not alone." A shiver ran down Robert's spine. The heart was no longer content to remain hidden. Its memory, its victims, its consciousness were manifesting in the very stone. Every eye was a sentinel, every whisper a warning, and the air seemed to hum with intelligence. James clutched his rope tighter, teeth chattering. "Doc, I can feel it. It's following us. Every time we move, it's there, watching." Robert forced himself to focus. The parchments had hinted at this. The heart did not merely observe. It influenced, it warped perception. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, figures seeming to stretch, shrink, or shift, vanishing if he looked directly. He tasted iron again, sharp and metallic, his stomach twisting with dread. Then, from the deepest corner of the passage, came a dragging sound, wet, deliberate, like something with limbs far too long for a human body. The stone floor beneath them vibrated faintly, thrum, ming with rhythm, synchronized with their racing heartbeats. A voice, guttural and wet, echoed from the walls themselves. "You cannot leave. You belong. Witness the memory. Join us." James stumbled backward, hitting the wall with a wet smack. "Doc, it's coming! It's right there!" Robert turned, lantern trembling in his hand, and for the first time he saw a shape. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light, but something solid yet shifting. The heart's form, elongated limbs, a torso that seemed to shimmer like liquid darkness, hollow eyes absorbing the weak lantern glow, a mouth twisted in a silent scream. The temperature plummeted, ice forming along the edges of their clothes. Every sense was assaulted, the wet touch of unseen fingers brushing their arms, the taste of iron on their tongues, the smell of decay thickening in the air, the low humming vibration through the stone, the eerie sight of the heart hovering just beyond reach. Robert felt it probing his mind, pulling at memory, fear, and instinct simultaneously. The heart wanted more than witnesses. It wanted them to understand, to feel the weight of centuries of ritual, suffering, and devotion. James whispered, trembling, "Doc, I can't. I don't know how much longer." Robert's vision blurred as whispers became a chorus. The hollow remembers. The heart sees. You cannot leave. And in that instant he realized the full horror. The heart had already claimed a part of them. Their minds were no longer entirely their own. Chapter 12. Shattered Reality. The passage seemed to stretch endlessly, walls bending in ways that defied reason. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, bouncing back in a delayed rhythm that made Robert dizzy. The air was thick, heavy, and metallic, pressing into their lungs like a living weight. Every breath carried the tang of iron and the faint rot of centuries-old decay. James clutched his rope like a lifeline, teeth chattering. "Doc, something's wrong. It's changing everything." Robert squinted through the oppressive darkness. The carved symbols on the walls, once fixed and familiar, now seemed to writhe, shifting before his eyes. Figures appeared where none had been, crouching, twisting, stretching, then vanished when he blinked. The whispers intensified, forming fractured words. See, belong, cannot leave, witness. The heart was no longer content to remain invisible. Its presence bent the cave itself. A faint glow emanated from the floor, illuminating shallow depressions that suddenly looked like footprints, not human footprints, but long, thin, and clawed, moving toward them. They hadn't been there moments before. James gasped, stumbling backward. It's following us. The stones, the walls, they're moving." Robert's pulse raced. The parchments had warned of this, of the heart's ability to manipulate perception, to pull witnesses into the cave's memory until reality itself became uncertain. Every sense was assaulted. The walls shimmered in the dim light, reflecting twisted images of themselves. The air tasted of iron and fear. The low vibration of the stone beneath their boots thrummed like a heartbeat, synchronized with their terror. Then, a cold, wet breeze swept past them. Robert felt a hand, solid, wet, impossibly cold, brush his arm. He spun, lantern swinging, but saw nothing. The shadows on the walls shifted again, forming a tableau of the sect. House's rituals, figures kneeling, hands raised, mouths open in silent screams. Bones and carved figurines littered the chamber, and in the center, a dark shape, fluid, alive, impossibly tall, twitched and stretched toward them. James whimpered. "Doc, it's showing us everything. The bloodline, the rituals, the disappearances. It's all alive." Robert swallowed, tasting copper on his tongue, and stepped closer to the figure in the shadows. It seemed to pulse with awareness, bending the darkness itself, folding the chamber in ways his mind could barely process. The whispering chorus rose to a crescendo. The heart sees. You are its witness. You cannot leave. Then the floor beneath them shifted. A crack appeared, widening slowly, revealing a dark abyss that seemed to breathe, exhaling cold air that smelled of iron and earth. Shapes moved at the edges. Figures crouched in the shadows, reaching, twisting, silent screams frozen on their faces. Robert realized, with a shiver that ran through every nerve, that the heart was not just showing them history, it was rewriting the present. Every step, every shadow, every sound was now part of its memory, and they were trapped inside it. A wet, guttural sound echoed from the abyss, deep and deliberate, vibrating through the walls and their bones. James screamed, backing into Robert, It's coming!" And Robert understood the horrifying truth. The heart didn't just remember, it consumed, and they were next. Chapter 13. The Heart Strikes. The air was suffocating now, thick and viscous, smelling of iron and damp stone. Every breath Robert drew was sharp with metallic tang, bitter against his tongue. The whispering had become deafening, circling inside his skull like a chorus of drowned voices. "You cannot leave. Witness. Belong." James stumbled beside him, eyes wide with terror. "Doc, it's moving. It's—" A wet, scraping sound interrupted him, reverberating through the chamber. Robert's pulse thudded in his ears as the shadows ahead began to twist unnaturally. Then he saw it. The heart, no longer distant, had taken shape fully. Its limbs were long and twisted, stretching like living smoke. Its hollow eyes glimmered, reflecting the weak lantern glow in a way that made them feel alive, intelligent, malevolent. Before Robert could react, a cold, wet tendril shot from the darkness, brushing against his arm with the touch of something alive. He recoiled, tasting copper on his tongue. The flesh along his forearm prickled, as if dozens of invisible fingers ran over it. James screamed, fumbling to grab Robert's arm. "Doc, don't let it—" The heart lunged forward, more substance than shadow now. Its elongated fingers scraped the stone walls, producing a wet, grating sound. The vibration traveled through the floor and into their boots, making every nerve in Robert's body scream. The carved figurines on the floor rattled and shifted slightly, as though reacting to the heart's movement. Robert's mind spun. The cave had never been empty, never silent. Every creak, drip, and whisper had been a warning. And now the heart was asserting itself, testing them, marking them as part of its centuries-long history. He could hear the sect's voices now, intertwined with the heart's presence, low chanting, desperate prayers, screams frozen in stone. The temperature dropped sharply, icy and wet, condensing on their skin, chilling them to the bone. Robert felt the tendrils brush again, wrapping lightly around his wrist, probing, sensing. James was trembling violently. "Doc, we're its prey. It wants us." Robert swallowed hard, tasting copper again, forcing his mind to focus. The heart wasn't merely attacking, it was showing them its power, making them understand the weight of what the sect had done, what it had become. Its presence was overwhelming, alive, conscious. Every sense screamed, the damp smell, the metallic taste, the wet touch, the low rumble through the stone, the impossible sight of the twisting shadow. Then the heart paused, its hollow eyes fixed on Robert. And in that moment, Robert understood. This was a test, a memory, a trap, and a warning. The heart could reach through stone, through time, and through sanity itself. The whispering coalesced into a final chilling sentence. The hollow takes. The heart remembers. You cannot leave. Robert's chest tightened, every nerve on fire with fear. He glanced at James, whose face was pale and frozen in terror. They were caught in the heart's grasp, and the only way forward was deeper, into the darkness it controlled. Chapter 14. The Inner Sanctum. The tunnel narrowed, forcing Robert and James to move single file. Every footstep squelched in mud, echoing strangely as if the cave itself were alive, listening, reacting. The metallic tang of iron thickened in the air, coating their tongues and making each breath sharp and heavy. The whispers had grown urgent, a cacophony of voices clawing at their minds. Deeper. Witness. Belong. James muttered prayers, voice trembling. Doc, we shouldn't go any further. It knows we're here." Robert's pulse thundered. The parchments had hinted at this. The inner sanctum, the chamber where the sect's most forbidden rituals had been performed, where the heart had been bound, or perhaps had bound itself centuries ago. He could feel the weight of history pressing on his shoulders, the cave alive with memory, awareness, and hunger. A faint glow emanated from the walls ahead, illuminating shallow depressions in the stone floor. Robert knelt to examine them. The shapes were unmistakable: handprints, footprints, deep scratches. Some seemed recent, others centuries old, layered atop each other like a living record of every soul who had entered the cave. James shuddered beside him. "Doc, look at this. It's bones. So many bones." Robert forced his lantern closer. The inner sanctum was larger than he had imagined. Bones, broken tools, and countless carved figurines were arranged in intricate patterns along the floor. Each pile told a story, a family offering, a ritual, a sacrifice, and at the very center, partially buried in mud and bone, lay a rusted iron chest, its surface corroded yet strangely intact. The heart's presence surged. Shadows stretched along the walls, bending unnaturally, reaching for the chest, for Robert and James. The whispers became coherent, chilling. "The heart remembers. The bloodline awakens. You are now part." Robert's hand hovered over the iron chest. The carvings on the walls seemed to pulse, shimmering in the dim light. He could hear faint scraping noises, the dragging of something massive moving just beyond the lantern's glow. The temperature dropped suddenly, icy gusts lashing their faces, carrying the smell of iron and decay. Every nerve in his body screamed. James's voice broke. "Doc, it's watching. It's alive. Don't touch it." But Robert's curiosity was relentless. He forced his hand down, brushing the chest's lid. The metal was wet to the touch, slick with condensation, or something else. A jolt ran through him, like the cave itself had gripped his arm. And then the chest creaked open. Inside lay remnants of the sect's darkest practices: parchment soaked in old blood, twisted figurines, and a small bundle wrapped in leather. Robert unfolded it carefully, the smell of decay hitting him instantly. The bundle contained a human hand, mummified, clawed, its hollow eyes carved into the palm, identical to the handprints they had seen earlier in the cave. A wet, guttural sound echoed behind them. The heart had moved closer, coiling around the chamber, its shadow merging with the darkness. Robert could feel its consciousness probing his mind, testing, marking, claiming. And then the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo. The bloodline awakens, the heart remembers, the hollow takes. Robert realized the truth, bone deep. The heart was not just a presence. It was a guardian, a predator, a memory made flesh, and it had been waiting for witnesses like them for generations. Chapter 15. The Hollow's Mirror. The chamber seemed to shift beneath their feet, every shadow elongated and twisted, flickering like wet smoke along the walls. The air was thick and metallic, pressing against Robert's lungs, leaving a coppery taste that made his stomach turn. The whispers surged again, no longer distant, but inside their heads. "See, remember, belong." James trembled violently. "Doc, it's showing us things. Things that aren't real. Or are they?" Robert's eyes scanned the inner sanctum. The bones and figurines seemed to twitch subtly, almost imperceptibly, and then the walls shimmered. Figures emerged from the stone itself, hollow-eyed spectres of the sect, kneeling in endless devotion, faces twisted in silent screams. The same ones depicted in the mural, but alive, as if the cave had pulled them into the present. The heart moved in the darkness, a massive shadow coiling along the walls. It was no longer a form at a distance. It was everywhere. Its presence pressed on Robert's mind, a probing, intelligent awareness that seemed to tug at memory itself. The whispers became voices, low, guttural, overlapping chants of the sect performing rituals, desperate pleas for mercy and cries of torment. James screamed, "Doc! They're They're real. The people. The victims. They're here. Robert could feel their eyes on him, every spectre reaching out in silent agony. The air grew colder, wet fingers brushing their arms, sending shivers through every nerve. He could taste iron on his tongue, smell the stench of decay thickening with each passing second. The floor vibrated underfoot, the stone humming like a living heartbeat. Then the heart's whisper became a chorus, almost intelligible. You are witness. The bloodline awakens. The hollow remembers. Join us. Suddenly, one of the apparitions stepped forward, more solid than the others. Its hollow be as fixed on Robert. A metallic taste flooded his mouth as he realized it was mimicking his movements exactly, a mirror of flesh and memory. The air grew heavy, oppressive, each breath a struggle. James grabbed Robert's arm, voice cracking. We can't stay here. It's pulling us in. Don't let it take us. Robert forced himself to focus, fingers brushing the mummified hand they had found earlier. Its palm seemed to pulse faintly, almost warm, as though it had a heartbeat. The heart's presence coiled closer, shadows twisting and crawling along the walls like liquid, reaching for them, marking them as part of its memory. And then the whisper became a single, deafening word, vibrating through their bones. You belong. Robert realized the horrifying truth. The heart wasn't just showing them visions. It was rewriting reality, weaving them into the sect's centuries-long history. Every hallucination, every shadow, every whisper was a thread in its web, and they were already entangled.
Chapter 16. Echoes of the Damned. The inner sanctum seemed alive, the stone walls pulsating as if breathing. Shadows writhed and twisted in impossible angles, elongating toward Robert and James, reflecting the sect's long-dead forms. The metallic taste of iron coated their tongues, thick and bitter, while the damp, fetid smell of decay clung to their nostrils. Each breath burned, each heartbeat vibrated unnaturally through the stone floor beneath them. James stumbled, gripping Robert's arm. "Doc, it's too real. The people, the rituals, they're here." Robert's lantern flickered, and in the brief light he saw them. Ghostly figures crouched in ritualistic poses, hands pressed against stone, faces frozen in silent screams. Bones and figurines littered the chamber like offerings to a force older than memory itself. The heart's presence coiled through the darkness, a massive shadow, fluid and intelligent, moving with deliberate awareness. A chilling sound echoed from every corner, the dragging, wet, deliberate noise of something massive moving just beyond sight. Then the spectres turned, hollow eyes locking onto them, mirroring Robert's movements exactly. Every motion, every twitch, every gasp was reflected in those tortured forms. James cried out, trembling violently. "Doc, it's following us, learning. It's changing. We can't." Before he could finish, a cold tendril of shadow shot out from the heart, brushing Robert's arm. The touch was icy and wet, crawling along his skin like liquid fear. A shiver ran down his spine, and he tasted copper, sharp and metallic, as if the cave itself bled into him. The heart's whisper filled their minds. "Join us. Witness. You belong." Robert's gaze shifted to the rusted iron chest. Inside, the mummified hand and blood-stained parchment seemed to pulse in sync with the heart, as if alive. He realized then, the heart didn't just consume memories, it recreated them, folding the past into the present until the boundaries of time were meaningless. One spectre moved closer, its hollow eyes fixed on Robert. He could feel centuries of fear and ritual compressing into that single gaze. The chamber vibrated underfoot, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. Every sense was assaulted. The damp touch of unseen fingers brushing their skin, the smell of old blood thickening in the air, the metallic taste clinging to their mouths, the low humming through the stone, the visual distortion of walls bending and stretching unnaturally. James grabbed Robert's wrist. We have to move, now, or it'll take us." The heart's tendrils writhed closer, shadow pressing in from every side, twisting the chamber into a labyrinth of darkness and memory. Robert's mind raced, the weight of the sect's centuries-old devotion pressing into him. The whispers became a chorus of the damned. "You cannot leave. The bloodline awakens. You belong." A sudden gust of cold air extinguished the weak lantern glow, plunging them into absolute darkness. Robert felt the tendrils wrap around his mind, probing, claiming, intertwining his consciousness with the heart's memory. And in the silence that followed, he realized one horrifying truth. They were no longer merely intruders. They were witnesses, prisoners, and part of the Hollow's eternal story. Chapter 17. The Heart's Grip. The darkness was suffocating, alive, pressing into every nerve. Robert could feel it crawling along his skin, cold, wet, and deliberate, sending icy shivers down his spine. The metallic tang of iron filled his mouth with each ragged breath, thick and bitter, clinging to his tongue like old blood. Every whisper from the shadows now rang clearly in his mind. "You cannot leave. Witness. Belong." James stumbled, nearly tripping over the jagged stones beneath their feet. "Doc, it's all around us. Every wall, every shadow. It's watching. Don't let it get inside your head." Robert's eyes darted to the rusted iron chest, its contents still faintly glowing in the darkness. The mummified hand, the blood-stained parchments, the twisted figurines, they pulsed rhythmically, synchronized with the heart itself. He could feel it. An intelligence, patient and cruel, testing them, bending reality, folding memory into the present. The heart manifested fully in the chamber. Its form was impossible, fluid and elongated, limbs stretching and twisting, eyes hollow yet piercing, a silent scream frozen on a face that was both human and not. Tendrils of shadow snaked along the walls, coiling, probing, brushing Robert's arms and legs with icy wetness that made every nerve scream. A chorus of whispers became coherent, guttural, filled with centuries of ritualistic terror. "Join us. Witness. The bloodline awakens. You belong." James grabbed Robert, panic choking him. "Doc, it's taking over. If it touches your mind, it'll claim you." Robert's lantern flickered, casting brief light across the chamber. In that flash, he saw the sect, ghostly, kneeling, chanting, offering bones, blood, and themselves to the heart. Their faces were hollow, mouths frozen in eternal screams. The carvings along the walls pulsed, almost alive, shifting to depict it. The very moment he stood in the chamber. The heart struck. One shadowy tendril wrapped around Robert's arm, cold and suffocating. His vision blurred. He could feel centuries of the sect's fear, devotion, and despair pressing into his mind, memories not his own flooding him, rituals performed in darkness, whispers of the past echoing in the present, agony and obedience intertwined. James screamed, yanking him backward. "Doc, fight it in your mind. Don't let it own you." Robert's hands shook as he clutched the mummified hand in the chest. Its pulse seemed to counter the heart's, grounding him. He tasted iron, smelled decay, and felt the wet brush of the heart's tendrils probing his mind. But through the terror, he realized something vital. The heart fed on fear and submission, not defiance. With a surge of will, he focused on his own memory. The crisp autumn air outside the cave, the smell of wet leaves, the warmth of sunlight on his skin. The heart recoiled slightly, as if resisting, the tendrils jerking backward. The whispers faltered. "Resist, resist." James gasped beside him, relief and terror mixing. "Doc, you did something. It's pulling back." For now, Robert's mind still throbbed with the heart's weight. He knew this confrontation was temporary. The heart had awakened fully, revealed its power, and claimed them in part. They had survived, but only barely. The cave had shown its might, its memory, and its demand, that the past was eternal, that the hollow never forgot, and that the heart never forgave. And somewhere deep in the shadows the whisper returned, soft but deadly certain. The heart watches, the hollow remembers, you belong. Chapter 18. The Labyrinth of Memory. The tunnel ahead seemed to twist impossibly, bending reality itself. Robert and James stumbled through the slick, uneven stone, the metallic tang of iron thick in their mouths, burning with every gulp of air. The whispers were everywhere, now urgent and overwhelming. You cannot leave. Witness. Belong. James grabbed Robert's arm, nearly pulling him off his feet. Doc, it's changing the cave. We can't follow the same path. It's alive. Robert's mind raced. Every corridor seemed to stretch, collapse, and shift when they weren't looking directly at it. Shadows moved independently of the lantern's glow, walls pulsed, and every step echoed with the voices of the sect, low, guttural chants entwined with screams of the damned. The heart's presence pressed into their minds, probing, twisting, testing. Tendrils of shadow brushed their arms and legs, cold and wet, leaving a prickle that crawled under the skin. Robert felt centuries of devotion, agony, and ritual clawing at him from every direction. The cave's memory had become a labyrinth, designed to trap intruders in the weight of its history. James gasped, pointing ahead. Look! The passage. It's different. Every time we try to go back, it's gone. We're trapped. Robert's eyes widened. He had suspected it, but now he understood fully. The heart didn't just haunt the cave, it controlled it. Every corridor, every shadow, every whisper was part of its design. The sect had bound themselves to it, and it had learned to ensnare anyone who dared enter. The floor trembled beneath them, a low, wet vibration that made their teeth rattle. The carvings along the walls pulsed and shifted, forming figures reaching out toward them, ghostly hands and hollow eyes pressing from stone. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. You belong. The bloodline awakens. Join us. James Stum bled and fell, scraping his hands on the damp stone. Doc, it's trying to claim us. We can't let it. Robert grabbed him, dragging him forward. He focused, tasting copper on his tongue, smelling iron and damp decay, feeling the wet brush of shadow against his skin, listening to the low hum of the heart vibrating through the stone. He forced himself to recall the outside world, the crisp autumn air, the smell of wet leaves, the warmth of sunlight on his face. The heart recoiled slightly as if resisting. But the cave shifted again. Corridors folded in on themselves, walls closing and stretching. The rusted iron chest lay in a new chamber, its contents glowing faintly, pulsing with the heart's rhythm. Robert realized the horrifying truth. Escape would not be simple. The heart's memory was labyrinthine, infinite and patient. It had claimed part of them, and it would not release them willingly. James's voice trembled. Doc, I don't know if we'll make it. It's too strong. Robert swallowed hard, tasting iron, feeling wet tendrils brush his mind, and whispered, We have to keep moving. We have to reach the surface, or we'll never leave the hollow alive. And behind them, the whispers laughed softly, a sound like wet stone grinding against stone. The heart watches. The hollow remembers. You belong. Chapter 19. The last breath of the hollow. The air pressed down on them, thick and metallic, each breath sharp with the tang of iron. Robert could feel the heart everywhere, coiling along the walls, writhing in the shadows, probing at their minds. Its whispers had grown deafening, 1,000 voices layered over each other. You cannot leave. The bloodline awakens. Witness. Belong. James stumbled, gasping for air, mud and grime smearing his clothes. Doc, I can't. It's everywhere. Every step we take, the tunnels, they're changing. Robert gritted his teeth, tasting copper again. The walls rippled in the lantern's weak glow, forming impossible angles. Shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, elongated, crawling figures, some pressing hollow eyes against the stone, mouths frozen in eternal screams. The floor quaked beneath their boots, vibrating with the heart's slow, deliberate pulse. The surface. We have to reach it, Robert shouted over the rising chorus. But even as he spoke, he realized the cruel truth. The heart controlled the cave entirely. Every corridor folded in on itself. Every passage stretched or vanished when they weren't looking. The labyrinth was alive, reshaping itself to trap them forever. A wet, cold tendril brushed Robert's arm, sending icy fear coursing through his veins. He tasted iron again, felt fingers brushing his skin as though the cave itself were alive, pressing, marking. James screamed, eyes wide with terror. Doc, it's taking me. Don't let it. Robert grabbed James, dragging him forward. Ahead, a faint glimmer of light broke through the twisting darkness, the faintest promise of the surface. But the heart surged, shadows flaring from the walls, forming a massive, coiling shape that blocked their path. Its hollow eyes fixed on Robert, intelligent, malevolent, aware. The whispers merged into a single deafening command. You belong to, he hollow remembers, witness. Robert felt his mind reel under the weight of centuries of memory, ritual, and suffering. The heart pressed inside his skull, showing him the sect's horrors, sacrifices, rituals, bloodlines bound to the cave, each generation consumed and remembered. He tasted copper, smelled decay, felt icy tendrils pressing into his flesh, heard the screams of the damned echoing in his ears. He forced himself to focus. Sunlight, crisp autumn air, wet leaves underfoot, the warmth of the forest outside. The heart recoiled, tentacles of shadow snapping back, but the labyrinth trembled, threatening to collapse around them. James gasped, choking. Doc, we're so close. Just a few steps. Robert nodded, voice shaking. Then we run. No hesitation. Keep moving. The heart surged forward, shadow and cold wrapping around their legs, pulling, gripping, trying to claim them. Robert felt fingers of stone and darkness claw at him, brushing his arms, legs, and mind. He yanked James forward with every ounce of strength, stumbling over slick stone, over mud and bone, over centuries of memory pressing against them. Then, just as the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, a small opening appeared, a slit of grey light at the end of the twisted tunnel. Sunlight, weak but real. Robert lunged, pulling James with him, heart hammering, lungs burning. The shadows writhed, reaching, clawing, but the lantern's weak glow reflected off the walls, illuminating the final stretch. Robert felt the heart recoil slightly, as if its prey was slipping through its fingers. The cave trembled violently, groaning, whispering, as if alive and angry. They sprinted, muscles screaming, lungs on fire, every sense assaulted. Iron taste, wet shadows brushing skin, cries of the past echoing, the smell of decay thickening, the pulse of stone vibrating through their bones. And then, with a final, desperate push, they burst through the slit of light, stumbling into the crisp autumn forest outside, gasping, drenched and trembling. The cave loomed behind them, silent now, still, but Robert knew.
Chapter 20. The Heart's Secret. The forest air hit them like a wall, crisp and cold, carrying the scent of wet leaves and pine. Robert's lungs burned with each ragged breath, his body trembling, every nerve alight with terror and relief. James sank to the ground, mud and grime streaking his face, gasping for air, shaking uncontrollably. For a moment, they allowed themselves to believe they had escaped. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and the cave's entrance looked like a distant mouth, closed, silent, waiting. But Robert's instincts screamed otherwise. The metallic tang of iron still lingered on his tongue, faint but undeniable. The whispers of the heart haunted his mind, echoing faintly beneath his own thoughts. The hollow remembers. You belong. Robert knelt, brushing dirt from his hands, staring at the forest floor. In the fallen leaves, he noticed something that made his blood run cold, tiny, shallow impressions, claw-like handprints, etched into the soil. Not his own. Not James's. They trailed from the cave's mouth into the trees. The heart. It didn't just stay inside, Robert whispered, voice hoarse. It left a part of itself. Here. With us. James looked at him, eyes wide, pupils dilated. Doc, it followed us? Robert shook his head slowly, swallowing the coppery taste in his mouth. No, not exactly. It marked us. Part of its memory clings. It will remember us, and if it ever awakens fully, we'll be drawn back. A sudden wind rustled the trees, carrying a wet, almost metallic scent. Robert shivered. The whispers returned, soft, almost inaudible, yet unmistakable. Witness. Belong. The bloodline awakens. He glanced at James. We survived. Barely. But the heart's secret, its power, it's not gone. It never will be. Every soul it touches becomes part of the hollow's story. James swallowed hard, voice shaking. So, it's eternal. Always waiting, always remembering. Robert's gaze returned to the cave, its dark mouth framed by twisted oaks. The shadows inside seemed to shift subtly, almost imperceptibly, as though the heart was aware, watching, patient. He could feel it in his bones, in the lingering metallic taste, in the weight pressing on his chest. The heart doesn't just consume, it records, it manipulates, it binds the living and the dead into its memory. Every witness, every sacrifice, every moment, it keeps them forever. And now, we are part of it. James shuddered. Doc, what do we do now? Robert swallowed, eyes never leaving the cave. We live, but we never forget. And we warn others, if they dare approach the hollow. The heart is patient, but it never forgets. One day, it will rise again. A faint rustle of leaves, a whisper in the wind, and the forest seemed to fall silent. Yet the copper tang lingered, and deep in Robert's mind, a single, unmistakable thought pulsed. You belong. The hollow waited, eternal, and its secret, the heart, would not rest until every witness was folded into its memory. The sun rose higher, but its light could not reach the darkness inside the cave. The heart's history was complete, and Robert and James were now part of its macabre story at the end.